I'm Scott Jurek, and I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and I've been running ultramarathons for over 21 years now. And it's been a sport that I have a real passion for, and just love being out in the woods, out in the mountains, and exploring my potential.
I'm sure this is not an easy question, but if you could summarize some of your career accomplishments in ultra running.
Well, I've pretty much done most of the big 100-mile races and beyond. I've won the Western States 100 7 times in a row. I've also won the Hard Rock 100 down in southern Colorado. I've competed in the Spartathlon, which is a 153-mile race from Athens to Sparta. Won that as well 3 times. And the Badwater 135, which is a race that goes from the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, Badwater Basin, to the portal of Mount Whitney. And that's a race that I've won twice as well.
So what inspired you to take on the Appalachian Trail?
For me, I've always wanted to do one of the national scenic trails. And throughout my ultra running career, because it takes a good chunk of time as well as the recovery following it. And I also wanted to just have the wisdom and experience to really do my best at something like a national scenic trail. And I've always looked at the history of the sport of ultramarathoning and records on the Appalachian Trail. I've had a huge amount of respect and just admiration. I've read so much about Scott Williamson and some of the through hikes that he's done, yo-yoing the Pacific Crest Trail, and spending a lot of time out west. I lived in Seattle for 11 years and would always go out to the Pacific Crest Trail and spend time running and hiking and backpacking. And I knew at some point in my career, I wanted to do one of the national scenic trails. And it would have made most sense probably to do the Pacific Crest Trail because I just had such a passion for that trail and was so connected with it being out west. But I felt like there was a pull to the Appalachian Trail. I'd only seen maybe 30 some miles of the trail, bits and pieces, run JFK 50 miler, which has 13 miles of the trail, and spent a little bit of time out east, but I'd never explored the Appalachian Mountains. And for me, it just seemed like I wanted to check out a new part of the country, going from the south to the north along the East Coast and experiencing the people. And the Appalachian Trail is just steeped in history, of course, being the oldest and probably the baddest trail out there when it comes to just ruggedness. And then the thru-hiking culture. For me, I've spent a lot of time in the wilderness, in the woods, all by myself, and love that experience. But there was something that I was drawn to that social connection and hearing about the history. And the whole idea really started with the Appalachian Trail of doing these long trails and continuum, and from start to finish, having that through hike experience. So that and my wife, I promised her that we do the Pacific Crest Trail section hikes, and we've been basically doing pieces of it year after year. And so that one we're kind of saving for ourselves. So it was really this idea of adventure and the unknown of not having experienced it.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your answer that you wanted to see the country going from south to north. When people are usually pursuing an FKT, they do the southbound version. Is there any reason you chose to go northbound?
It's definitely a good question because a lot of people who are really into records and taking a look at it, all of the last record attempts have been set from north to south, including most recently Heather Anderson's self-supported. And it definitely made sense, but for me, I wanted, it was probably going to be my one shot to do this. My wife said, okay, one shot to do this. It's a big time commitment. And she was game to support me. I thought to myself, I want to really go, even though I couldn't walk with spring like most of the thru-hikers, I could still go the direction that, thru-hikers have traditionally gone. Sure. Even though, the Maine has that, or the title has the title of the trails, Maine to Georgia. I really wanted to experience it, as well as, be able to interact. And when you're going from north to south, you kind of just pass by. There's a few southbounders out there on the trail, but you just kind of pass by the northbounders and you don't really get to have that conversation as well, share miles.
Interesting. So you mentioned Heather Anderson's record. Have you spoke with her since she's completed?
I have not yet. No? I'm excited to hear about her experience.
Yeah.
Definitely been in awe of what she's accomplished on the Pacific Crest Trail.
Right.
So it'll be fun. I have definitely shared some time with Jennifer Davis. We had a coffee here in Boulder actually when she was coming through town. So we got to rehash some stories and
that's cool.
Just kind of relive some of the experiences and some of the similarities as well as differences, like you mentioned, the whole South versus North thing. And I definitely, when I look back at it and talking to Jen, there were some things that, could have been improved upon, but some of the things too, I just wanted aesthetically to, really hike and run my own through hike experience and have that. So
sure. Would you have any interest in taking on a self-supported FKT?
I definitely have some interest. I'm not sure, which trail that'll be. There are obviously certain trails, and this is what I think is so fascinating. When I also helped David Horton on his Pacific Crest Trail speed attempt, and of course record-breaking performance in 2005, and spent 2 weeks with him, helping him out and crewing and supporting him and running a lot of the trail. And it really kind of intrigued me. There's some trails are known for being more, I guess, conducive to self-supported journeys. And the reason for that is just access.
Sure.
The less access you have, the more advantage I think a self-supported hiker / runner would have in terms of setting records. So for me, I'm always fascinated with that, as well as, I spend a lot of time backpacking and hiking. I think a lot of people say, oh, he's just a runner. He's just running all the time.
Yeah.
But I love, figuring out, okay, how can I make gear lighter? How can I, utilize food sources that, pack in a lot of calories with the least amount of weight? And so I find that kind of whole dilemma interesting and fascinating.
We'll definitely come back to the food in a little bit because you're definitely known for that. But first I want to know, what do you consider the biggest similarities between setting an ultramarathon course record and the AT FKT?
I would say it's completely different.
Okay.
And that's why I think the whole experience, I haven't done an FKT or an adventure run on this magnitude before. And it's, that was another reason to do it. I just hadn't done anything like it before. And there were a lot of things I was learning along the way, even though I had all this experience of helping other people and reading and researching. I didn't really want to mind. My good buddy Carl Meltzer was so surprised, like, how come you didn't ask me more questions? And a lot of people I did ask David Horton a few things, but I also felt like there's this respect between, fellow thru-hikers, record attempters who, we share information, but at the same time, just respect. And I didn't want to mind somebody. I wanted to kind of, I guess, problem solve some of my own problems. That's one thing when you're out on the Appalachian Trail that's completely different from setting a course record. You are supported in ways such as my attempt, but it wasn't like, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. You don't have this finite window of, say, 100 miles. You have now this journey that's going to last weeks and weeks, and if not months.
Right.
So a lot of things can go wrong, and a lot of things you have to problem solve along the way. So I think logistically, that's the big difference between, say, a course record on an ultramarathon course and something like an FKT, especially something like a long trail or national scenic trail, like the Appalachian Trail.
So you mentioned that you didn't seek a lot of people's input on how you should be taking on the AT, and you'd only seen a pretty small stretch of the AT prior to your attempt. So maybe you didn't have a lot of expectations about what the Appalachian Trail would be like going into this, but how did the AT differ from your expectations?
Well, I knew it was going to be tough. That's one thing, even though I didn't get as much information before or spend a lot of time on the trail. Growing up in northern Minnesota, I knew how rugged the Midwest as well as the East Coast hills and woods can be. It's not like this straight shot, flat country. And I think for me, I had this respect going in. And I guess when I got to New Hampshire and Maine, I knew it was going to be super difficult. However, after getting through Pennsylvania and the rocks of Pennsylvania, I was blown away with just the sheer difficulty. And sometimes it didn't even feel like a trail. Sometimes it just felt like slabs of rock mixed in with roots. And I was just blown away. And that's one thing I think that's different from the West and the Rockies. You have a lot of paths that were built for stock animals and horses. And here on the Appalachian Trail, it's just foot travel. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that the trail is so rugged that even walking, 1 to 2 miles an hour is a chore. Whether you have a pack on or whether you don't have a pack on.
Yeah, you'll definitely hear a lot of complaints amongst the hikers, especially about Pennsylvania. A lot of rocks. Yeah. So you talked about kind of how an ultramarathon is different from doing something like the AT, in that there's so many different things that can go wrong. In your AT attempt, approximately 300 miles into your thru hike, you sustained a torn quadriceps, and you kind of have a history for battling through various injuries and ailments in your race history. I think I speak for everyone when I ask how.
It's interesting. I at that moment in time, I thought for sure, my trip was done. And I told Jenny, I'm like, it's done. David Horton was helping me for a couple of days in North Carolina and Tennessee. And he was just like, your body has a way to heal itself. You've been doing this for 20 years. your body will figure out a way. And the biggest thing, as somebody who's trained as a physical therapist and having all this experience, I still had that doubt. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important because a lot of people assume, oh, you just got through the injuries, no problem. There's a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain, but I also had to do a lot of like on the trail remedying the situation. Mm-hmm. That was figuring a way, okay, I figured I would just walk the next day. I did 31 miles the previous day when, my knee and quad were so bad I could, limping was a chore.
Right.
And then figured out a way, okay, if I can walk, 30 some miles each day for the next couple of days, see if taking the load off of the knee and the quad will help let them heal a bit. And in addition to that, I was doing natural and anti-inflammatories. I even had to do some over-the-counter and prescription anti-inflammatories to really hit it. And then it was the icing. It was the pneumatic compression to help the swelling around there. So it was really kind of a combination of on the trail remedying of like decreasing the load on the knee, using the poles more, and then figuring out a way how I could just give it maximal amount of rest in the short window of 6 hours of sleep. So it was one of those things. And then again, my body did find a way to heal itself, even though I was able to run after 3-4 days, running more than hiking, and just kind of built that resistance to it. And it wasn't pain-free, but it gradually started to become more and more pain-free over the course of a week and a half.
So I guess that answers my next question is, at what point did you feel like you were over at least that injury?
It was probably like completely over it. I would say probably 2 weeks later.
Wow.
Where I felt. So it did take some time. It wasn't like a quick, and I think that's the thing too is, my advice would be, trusting your body. Don't always just push through the pain. I think some people just think, okay, I can push through the pain. It's just, mind over matter. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely some of that. But beyond that, you have to figure out, okay, how can I decrease the inflammation? How can I take the load off the problem area? You have to basically rehab and self-rehab. And that's what a lot of thru-hikers do. I remember meeting a lot of thru-hikers on the trail and giving them advice. People would be rubbing out some type of area, or they'd have shin splints. And I talked to them about some of the things that I had done and I had learned.
Yeah.
That's where I think, the community of the trail out there, people are really, friendly, and people want to help each other because we all have that same goal of, finishing the trail.
Sure.
Getting to the end.